Welcome to Second Take, the show that takes a look at the issues behind the news. South Africa's economic reforms have come into focus in recent weeks, especially those in the electricity sector. Terence Creamer joins me to discuss some of the issues and concerns being raised. Hi, Terence.
Hi, Chanel.
What is the background to South Africa's economic reforms?
Well, they go back to when we had this transition from the Zuma administration to Ramaphosa, and we had that very long period of no growth in the economy, deep levels of corruption in the state-owned enterprises. And there was an analysis of what are the binding constraints to growth. And there were some very obvious ones, and they became even more obvious after COVID. And the big one was the electricity crisis, and load shedding really intensified after COVID. And we'd also had a period where we hadn't been procuring new generation. Then there was Transnet's performance just sort of falling off a cliff, so the freight logistics. And then there were these legacy issues around water use licenses taking many, many months to get issued. There was this whole thing about spectrum, being broadband spectrum, that was on the agenda to be auctioned for many, many years, and it hadn't been. And then the sort of visa issues around, what skills should come into the economy, and also tourism visas. There was big delays and backlogs around that. So basically, eventually, a process got formalized after initial papers being distributed by the then Finance Minister Tito Mboweni, now late, but it formalized into a partnership between Presidency and Treasury into Operation Vulindlela. So for a number of years we've had these economic reforms underway under Operation Vulindlela, sort of a coordination place where heads are knocked together, actions are taken, very disciplined monitoring and evaluation processes take place at that level. And then there was also these partnerships that have been formed with government. So but beyond the economic reforms, we've also seen reforms now in the criminal justice space, with business supporting that. So it's social and economic reforms, and in the governance space that are now, there's partnerships around that. So that's the background: very low growth, a chronic and deepening unemployment crisis. We've seen the figures again worsening this week. So the view was that if we could get some of these binding constraints under control in electricity, freight logistics, and all the others I mentioned, that we could start raising the growth levels in South Africa, also raising investor confidence, getting more investments, and ultimately, hopefully, getting this unemployment crisis under control.
Why is particular attention being given to the electricity reforms?
Well, the electricity was really the big ticket item. We had this load shedding crisis that really goes back to 2007. So we've been living it for many, many years, but it really got deep in 2022, 2023. We were having daily load shedding, and it was actually twice a day load shedding in many cases, more days of the year with load shedding than without. So it was really, really deep. So electricity was the big focal point. We had a National Energy Crisis Committee established. We had a massive push by business to support Eskom once government had given Eskom this very big debt relief to help them at the power stations, to get the coal-fired power stations maintained and sort of operating at a better level. And we have seen an improvement there. There's been a bit of backsliding this year relative to last year, but now there's a signal from that the energy availability factor from the coal fleets is starting to stabilize at a 60% type level. The view that it should go to 70%, I don't know, we'll have to see if that's really achievable, but it started to stabilize, and we have had more stable electricity supply. But more recent focus has been the sort of pushback to the reforms that seem to be coming out of Megawatt Park. Eskom is being unbundled, and it's going to be a different entity in the future. We've got a 5-year progression towards taking the National Transmission Company South Africa fully out, unbundled, to form an independent transmission system operator. But behind the scenes, there's some concern about will this TSO really have the wherewithal, the balance sheet, to do what it needs to do, because there seems to be some resistance around allowing the full unbundling from Eskom holdings. Then there will be the unbundling of generation and distribution, which is also going to be big. So there's a concern about that. That's a bit invisible, but visibly the court case against the traders, or against NERSA particularly, and against 5 traders, that was a visible signal that the reforms might be stalling, that Eskom is flexing its monopoly muscles. Eskom used the argument that it needed clarity on the trading rules, but they hadn't done so when the previous round of traders were licensed, so it was very belated. And it sent a signal that, oh, there's a chilling effect here, we're trying to pull back on the reforms. And the minister, to his credit, has intervened quite quickly. He noted that NERSA already had a process underway, a 12-month process underway, to get these rules clarified for the trading environment. He then asked NERSA, could you truncate that period to 3 months? And given that, he said to Eskom, surely you can stay or hold back on your court case. We haven't heard officially yet, but I think the pressure is there. So, that's the more visible. And then the other, more invisible, is the difficulties that IPPs are having all the time in getting grid access. And the grid access rules are very cumbersome, very opaque, and there's frustrations every now and then we see they boil out into the public domain, and people talk about not being able to get their budget quote, not being able to get their grid access out of Eskom. So there's this feeling that maybe the reforms are stalling a little bit there. And then organised business made a very assertive play last week around the trading licence issue, and called on the minister to intervene. Both Business Leadership South Africa and BUSA made a very, very assertive statement, and the minister responded. And it looks now that signal that was made this week by the minister, that the reforms are irreversible, or was an important signal. He did it with Eskom in the audience, or on the same podium. So I think it was an important signal that was sent, that this policy, the tail and the dog issue, the Eskom tail can't sort of wag the policy dog. The minister is in charge of this policy agenda, and the reforms need to go ahead. That is the position of government.
More broadly, an initiative has been launched to provide an independent view of reform progress or otherwise.
Yeah, so as I said, the business and government are cooperating not just on electricity and freight logistics or economic reforms, but also the social reforms or governance reforms, as well as crime, the criminal justice. And Business Leadership South Africa has built this online platform where you can have visibility of what progress is being made. And it's quite startling, because, you talk about reforms, but there are actually 254 or something like that reform deliverables under these 3 areas. Most of them, that we give attention to around the Operation Vulindlela ones, the economic reforms. That's the one that we focus on most particularly. But across these 3 areas, there's like 250 of these deliverables. So it gives you a dashboard view of which are going, which are complete, which are moving, and it gives it in a sort of a heat map, green for it's moving well or it's completed, amber for it's going but there's some issues, red where there's some really, really problematic issues that need to be dealt with. So it gives you a snapshot, a quick snapshot. And I suppose the view is business has invested a lot in these reforms, these ongoing engagement at a very high level between CEOs and cabinet ministers, that these reforms are vital to changing the growth trajectory of South Africa. And we're seeing that, this is also can help put pressure, as we saw with the statement from the business this week or last week around traders. This can also put visible pressure where there's obvious blockages, because we're really only at the end of the beginning in the electricity space of these reforms. A long way to go, and we actually the real where there are winners and losers, that rubber is now hitting the road. So people are starting to feel and push back. And we saw it wasn't just Eskom, but also Salga pushing back against the traders. And the same is going to happen. I think although at the moment there's a lot of excitement around what's happening in freight logistics, and it looks like there's going to be an announcement soon on third-party access. And we know there was that RFI process which is going to be converted into RFPs later in the year for certain of the corridors around private concessions. So there's movement there, but it's going to be a bit like where electricity is now. There's going to be a point where the pinch points and the pain is going to be felt by sort of serious incumbents which have had monopoly power for many, many years. And we're going to see that pushback, I'm sure, at some point. So having this continual pressure from an independent or outside, one, to say, yes, progress is being made, so you can speak to the investor community and say, well, here, we believe real progress has been made on all these levels. But then when there isn't progress being made, be able to say to government, look, you said you were going to do this by a certain date and you haven't, and we have actually done a clear analysis of where the blockages are, and there are blockages and it needs to be cleared, to be able to communicate that. So I think that's taking our reform agenda maybe to a different level of visibility and accountability. So I think it's a positive development.
Thank you. That's the Second Take show for this week. Thank you for watching, and join us again next time for more news analysis.